So for a 5-minute discussion about the creative process, which would necessarily be a bit of a précis, what I've tried to do is identify what I would call 5 creative threads which are involved in the creative process that don't necessarily work in a linear fashion that starts with one and goes to the next, but they rather work more kind of interweaving and ongoing rolling interplay between the threads. And the first one I'd like to talk about is the idea of the question. And the question arises from the artist's observation of the world, the physical phenomenon of the universe, the way in which people interact with each other, internal observations as well, anything which has an impact on the artist. And from that emerges a question, a research question, if you like. And in 1988, the question for me was, how do I live my life? I was a white man living in a predominantly white middle-class suburb with my little family in the middle of apartheid South Africa, in a state of emergency that was about to implode. And I was concerned with the question, how can I live? How do I deal with the anxiety and with the conflict inside me? And how do I transform? And at the same time, I was working with a Polish percussionist called Maciek Szejbal, who was teaching himself to be a jazz drummer. So for that, he would be practicing 8 hours a day. And one day he said to me, "So you're an artist, when do you practice?" Now, I've got a degree and a couple of awards, actually. So he just laughed, of course, and said, if you're an artist and you take yourself seriously, then you practice. There's a reason that it's called a practice. So I began to practice with him, and I began to spend the day doing scales, doing physical exercises, as many as I could, that I'd learned as a student, but now was teaching myself. Exercises, one of the key ones was about how the mime can play 2 characters in the same scene. So some of the mime transformations would look at different aspects of the body. So just purely the angle of the feet to change from this to this, and the line of the legs starts to give a different impression of how the characters, so that you start to look at 2 different character energies, maybe with the feet, this to this, this to this, but then also the spine changing orientation with the rest of the body as well. So that this character, to transform into this, can be as quick as possible. Doing the exercises started to merge with the question, and the question started to emerge in the exercise itself. So performance material started to emerge from those exercises. And then at the same time, my observation, the question, brought my attention to this conflict between human beings and the Parktown prawn in Joburg at the time. And observing that, it was clear that fear instantly turned into violence. People reacted to this thing with violence rather than anything else. And that seemed to reflect the way in which the country was. So even more performance material started to emerge. I would be writing bits of script that would engage with this conflict between the human being and the insect, and the human being. Those kind of changes on an ongoing process. The question provoking the exercise provoking the question, then that material I needed to craft. So I started to work them even more into scenes, to write a piece each day, then to practice playing that, in the practice of playing it, to expand on the scene more, then go and scribe that into the text. So on an ongoing process, the question, the practice, and the craft began to stimulate each other towards the form. And after a few weeks, I started to have a series of scenes that could then be constructed into a form which became the play, The Ugly Nunu. Then that form was performed for an audience repeatedly every night. And through that exchange, which is the 5th creative thread, if you like, the form started to change even further. So by the end, we had crafted a piece of work which dealt with all of those things, which had evolved through the question, through practice, through craft, through the form, and through the exchange with an audience, into something which predominantly lived in the imagination of the audience. That the work of the artist is not to bury himself in the material, but to craft from all of those things an experience for the audience. So the material that the artists work with is the imagination of the audience. The tool might be the body and the body in space and physicality, but the experience lies in the audience's imagination.